Okay, okay, here we are. So, before I show the stuff down there that you unlock, let me read the descriptors here for some of the cutscenes. So, the intro. Null ambushes Bog, then lives to regret his mistake. The story's opening. The epic struggle begins for control of the savage skies. We already know about the pariah ending. Mortalvis is overthrown, and evil has a new king. Now for the concept art stuff here. For the screen art, loading screen art and stuff. Snapshots from Savage Sky's many environments. Some of these environments are unique. You only get to see them once in the campaigns, in the different campaigns. The Vertwin Gallery. Concepts for the Vertwin forces. Chrysalis Gallery. Where do those where did those mutant freaks come from? Pariah Gallery. See how the seeds of evil were sown. And lastly, the Character Gallery. Concepts and art from the cutting room floor. Yeah, a lot of those characters and such, they came from an earlier, different build of the game that probably had more emphasis on the riders more so than the creatures. But that's where we segue into this game's development. At its earliest core, Savage Skies kind of went through quite a number of changes through development. The earliest was that it was originally under the title Black Skies, or more specifically, Ozzy's Black Skies. This was because it would have featured music and the likeness and voice of the legend himself, Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy was signed on to do this game, and it was meant to sort of pay homage to part of his career of, being the legend rock star that he is. He went as far as to record even a brand new song to use for the game. Before we get into all that, let's go over all the stuff that Ozzy was supposed to do. First, first, when it came to the game's plot, it was somewhat meant to be the same in a way. The difference being, though, was that instead of the generic looking king that was used in the final, the king of Freyawind was honestly, he was modeled to resemble Ozzy himself, or at least as close as you can get him to look like himself during the time he was still alive and using graphics for a PS2 back in the early 2000s. Now, from there, while the plot still remains mostly the same, one of the changes that was made was that instead of dying to some random wraith, Ozzy King, or King Ozzy as I should probably call him, he was going to be swallowed by a warloth instead. This was meant to be a reference to the infamous moment in his career where Ozzy ended up biting the head of a bat during one of his performances. Yeah, this was during a concert he had in Des Moines in Iowa. Ozzy bit the head of a bat and he thought it was some kind of toy that a fan had thrown on stage. But when he picked it up and bit its head, he realized that it was real and live. And so he immediately needed emergency treatment and rabies shot. And this was during his tour of Diary of a Madman. Yeah, it's pretty much, yeah. Anyway, after that, the way that it would have worked from there was that the three factions in the Black Skies was that each of them were meant to represent different sides of Ozzy's career. The Virtuin campaign was meant to represent Ozzy's virtuous side that started in the 90s up till, well, the present time, really. In the Chrysalis faction, it was meant to represent his scientific and magical side, that his scientific and magical phase that he was going through with his career during the 80s. And then, when it came to the pariah half, it was meant to represent his evil side from the 70s, going through that very hard rock phase. From there, well, the only other things that Black Skies would have had and such, there were meant to be lots of things with his music. There's a few songs that Osbourne and Black Sabbath had that were going to be part of the soundtrack. Black Skies was the original song that Ozzy composed for the game. In the final, it would appear he would use it. Um, it ended up as a bonus track in the uh, European and Japan pressings of his single Dreamer. Of course, in this day and age, you can easily find it on YouTube or Spotify if you want to listen to Black Skies. I myself have not heard it, but I would like to give it a try and see what it's like. Maybe save it to my playlist. As for other songs that were going to be used, other songs that Ozzy and Black Sabbath had that they were going to use for the game would have been Crazy Train, War Pigs, Paranoid, No More Tears, and See You on the Other Side. Some of these were re recorded and remixed for the game. The only ones we know that were re recorded or remixed were Crazy Train, War Pigs, and Paranoid. Other than that, another thing that was meant to be with Ozzy was that because, again, that he was going to be highly involved with the game, he was also going to be the narrator announcer guy. So he would do the voice whenever you pick up the power ups or describe the creatures when your mission starts. The only no lines that we don't have the actual audio files for them, but we know what he says though. Anytime you picked up armor, he would say, I am Iron Man. My voice there. Lots of these things he's picking up are actually a reference to some of his own songs. You pick up invisibility, he says, out of sight. You pick up health, he'd say, ooh, now that feels better. If you picked up the high voltage power up, actually, no, he didn't have a line for that. High voltage power up's name was originally called Electric Funeral, which is a reference to the song of the same name. There's even an outtake line where, when going over the creatures, when it came to Rafe Slicer, he said, and this is an outtake, just know that, but he said, what the fuck is a Rafe Slicer? Which I paid a little homage to in the video when we did Rafe Slicer the first time. I paid a little homage to that line. Other factors that were meant to be in the game with mechanics and such, Rafe Slicer wasn't originally going to have fire related attack. It was going to use electricity. It was going to use lightning bolts and electricity. In fact, it was meant to be similar to Man Tao's attacks. Presumably, this was changed because they didn't want to copy attacks off of one another. But this was also because originally electric um, attacks were meant to be an elemental factor in the game. But in the end, they ended up being downplayed into more of just a hazard or from the high voltage power up. And therefore, only fire, poison, and ice remained as the elemental attacks and statuses that you get. Another thing was that the writer, or Ozzy, because he's Ozzy riding on the creatures, Ozzy had the ability to use lances, dragon lances, like a knight would on a horse. And there were other meant to be other things like tornadoes and updrafts and water sprouts composed of molten lava. These would have been possible hazards to avoid on some maps. There were also meant to be other NPC hazards such as basilisks, foot soldiers, ballistas, catapults, and even giant plants that would throw boulders and cannonballs and cows. This was all removed. However, the hive in the mission where you have to destroy it in the Virtuin campaign, it does shoot, as the narrator calls it, foul organisms. When it came to mission names, some of them again were based on Ozzy and Sabbath songs. The Soul Assassin mission was originally called Steal Away the Night. Then there was meant to be one called Planet Caravan. This mission is that you had to protect a pariah caravan from Chrysalis attackers. It was probably meant to be similar to the mission The Canyons of Peril. Then there was these are referred to as mirror missions where you might have noticed how in some campaign missions mirrored one another Like, take the Wizard's Tower on the Virtuin and Chrysalis campaign. For the Virtuin, you had to defend it. You had to defend it from being destroyed. For the Chrysalis, you had to assault the tower, but only to kidnap the prince. Destroying the tower after kidnapping him was just a secret objective if you wanted to do that. There was meant to be a mirror mission of the Winds of War, where on the Chrysalis side, you had to protect the Sky Trees from the Pariah. There was meant to be a mirror of that for the Virtuin campaign, where it was you that had to destroy the Sky Trees. Likewise, likewise, there was meant to be a mirror mission of the final assault, in which you had to defend the capital from the war beast, and you had to use Yomar. This is possibly why the secret objective in the Deceit Affirmed mission says for you to use Yomar. Pretty difficult to do that. Now let's go over some early skins and, more importantly, scrapped mounts that didn't make it into the game. Originally, instead of the golden color that he had, Bog had more of a green look to him. They were going to repurpose this into another creature, or at least they were going to use this skin, I believe, in what would have been the Xbox version of the game, which was canceled, but nothing came to it with that. And originally, Kettle didn't have his green color. He had more of an orange color to his armor plating. He even had teeth from on his model from the looks of it. Zealot originally had a darker color. He he looks purplish, but he could just be pure black, but it's hard to tell. Now, on to the real meat and bones, the on what would have been some scrapped mounts. Just know, not every creature could make it in. The original idea was that there were supposed to be 30 of them. And in the end, only 24 of them made it in. One of these creatures is known as Rog. Just remove the R and put a B, and you got Barg. But Rog, as you see in this image that was shown in the Pariah concept video you can unlock, is some kind of skeleton creature. But based on its appearance, it may have just simply been an early design for Gormag. That said, though, Rog's data is still in the game, so it's quite possible that when they were making it during Black Skies, Rog was the choice to use for Gormag, or as I said, Rog was Gormag at first, but then as development went on, they just changed it into how we know it now. Then there was a Chrysalis mount known as Keto. Keto, well, we don't know anything. We just know that it was a Chrysalis mount. As for what Keto looked like, we don't know. Only its data exist in the code. As for other creatures, the Virtuin had a few designs for creatures. They had, I guess, the idea was that the Virtuin were going to draft living natural animals, and that they would have put on mechanical wings to help them to fly. As you could see with this rhino and weasel, and with this gorilla. Not sure how it would have worked out though, but it is kind of an interesting idea. Another, do ignore that. Another, oh, great. Bad timing to be messaging me. Some other creatures that were scrapped, and they even had um models, of course. One of them is some lynx like creature with bone like wings, as seen in this image. It was a pariah creature of some kind. I'm guessing, at best, this creature was probably meant to be more as an early model for Yomar, possibly even an alternate skin choice. Then another one would be this bat like creature. Again, similar to the one with the lynx. I'm assuming this bat like creature was meant to be more of an early version of Warloff. But according to what was said, the reason that at least this version of the creature was scrapped was because they didn't like how the rider sat on it. Because in the air, it was almost a vertical position, which doesn't look very comfortable. And then in this image with Wraith Slicer, you can see some kind of fish like creature. It would have been very interesting for a skeletal fish to be on the pariah team. Speaking of fish, there was another chrysalis mount that got into the Black Skies as a model, but ended up being removed in the end. Its name is Gilborn. It was a giant angler fish, but it had colorful, colorful look that you would see on reef fish. I guess the idea was when it came to some of the chrysalis mounts, they were all meant to invoke a sea creature feel, or at least creatures associated with water, which is partially still in the final game, but only through three creatures. Oculus and Mantaw are meant to be an octopus and manta ray. Sid is described as a creature from the swamps, so it is frog like. Gilborn would have just made perfect sense to use to complete this sea creature theme of being a fish. But in the end, Gilborn was removed. We're not sure how he would have played out, but given that it's got what looks like guns attached to its side, I think it would have been no different from Crom having that cannon grafted to it. Then from there, as things were shaping up and getting good, well, things changed greatly. Development problems, having to find a publisher, and just a bunch of other stuff like that. But more importantly, the event of September 11th happened and the game was delayed. Because of that, they had to push everything back, and this is where, unfortunately, they had to cut Ozzy's involvement. Likewise, they also had to cut whatever development they had for both the PC and Xbox version of the game. In fact, the PC version was meant to have an online multiplayer. Some of its data can still be found in the PS2 version. The idea was that for multiplayer, at least a idea for it, was that it would have been 16 players playing Capture the Flag. So 8v8, I guess. If not an 8v8, it might have been a whole free for all. The other thing for the Xbox version was that the green bog skin was supposed to return, possibly as the alternate color to use. If I were to take a guess, had the Xbox version actually get made, I'm going to assume it was meant to be the definitive version of the game. That's just me. The superhero, the superhero concept power up was even shown here in this image, where it was your rider that would fly like Superman, and I would assume that he would be semi invincible and shoot his own projectiles and such. The Xbox version was also supposed to have multiplayer. You do death matches, team battles, crystal capture being capture the flag, and of course, With it saying co-op missions, I'm assuming this meant that in any missions in the game that had wingmen, a second player could join you. Second or third player can join you to help you in the campaign. But who knows? Even though that Ozzy's involvement was removed, there is a promotional poster of on the back cover of Ozfest from a tour program book back in 2001. It even does say, if you read it, it says, "From the godfather of heavy metal himself comes a flying creature action game that must be experienced. Ozzy's Black Skies. Fly 24 fantastical beasts of war through 30 missions and dozens of kicking environments. Crush your opponents and soar to victory as the outrageous Ozman himself. Be the first to play the ultimate Ozfanatic experience in a preview demo exclusively in the Ozzy tent at Ozzy's Village of the Damned. It'll arrive at holiday season of 2001 on PS2 and PC. Yeah, none of that happened, unfortunately. But apparently, some people still were able to. Any people that went to the Ozfest of that year, good on you to have such rare merchandise. Well, I think I'm gonna stop there. I think that's all I can share in regards to the game's development. Overall, it would have been really cool and interesting if they could have kept Ozzy's involvement with it because, as obviously Ozzy passed away like what was it, a year ago? It was like a year or two ago, right? Yeah, it was last year that he passed away and what a legend. So in a way, like in a way, me doing this game does feel like me paying honor to Ozzy in a sense. I mean, I do enjoy some of his music. I do believe I do like some of his music, so, it's kind of good that I played this game that although the final version does not have any of his involvement, it's still his influence is still there in a way. Like the soundtrack slightly invokes Black Sabbath slightly. Not by much, but it's there. Well, that will do for this episode of Savage Skies. As for the next one, well, just yeah, be ready for the next game is all I can say. So, that is it, and I will see you guys in the next one.